Major changes to the Privacy Act to affect more than 2 million small Australian businesses. AI-powered chatbots are coming to Facebook, and Costco is now selling that bulk essential, gold bars. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It is Friday, the 29th of September, 2023. I'm Michael Thompson, and Sean Aylmer is nearly back in the country now. So I'm joined for one more weekday show of Fear and Greed by Jennifer Duke. Jen, good morning.
Good morning. It feels like it's been a long time. I'll be sad to go.
We still have the weekend edition tomorrow, though. So you still have... And for anyone who hasn't tuned into the weekend edition, I would definitely recommend giving it a go because it's a vastly different program. It's very competitive where we are tossing stories out there and hoping to secure a win. And I'm hoping to send you on your way with a solid thrashing, Jen.
That's so polite of you, Michael. Good sportsmanship on this show.
It's what I'm here for. Now, after the show, you have an interview coming up with Persia Navidi, who is a partner at Hickson's Lawyers, about some major legal cases involving Vanguard and Mercer, some of the biggest investors in the world.
That's right. We were talking about greenwashing and some of the cases against both of them on greenwashing allegations and why there is this big crackdown at the moment, as well as some of the penalties that can result for companies that get it wrong.
Yeah, it is a good chat. It's coming up a little bit later on. The main story this morning, though, Jen, 2.3 million businesses are facing changes to the way that they handle personal information. That's due to a government shakeup of the Privacy Act.
Yeah, there was a major review of the Privacy Act released earlier this year, and the government is now backing most of the proposals. So among them are changes that have implications for millions of Australian small businesses. And that largely includes the need to seek informed consent about handling personal information and the need to destroy data when it's no longer needed. But the really big part is this. So businesses with turnover under $3 million have been exempt from the Privacy Act and so don't have any requirement at the moment under these rules to keep information securely or tell their customers if they've been hit with a data breach. But one of the recommendations was for this exemption to be removed.
You mentioned that the government agrees with this in principle, but how might it actually play out?
So, Michael, Attorney General Mark Dreyfus said that there would be a transition period to help small businesses get across the rules and requirements. At the moment, that hasn't been specified about how long that period might be. The Council of Small Business Organisations of Australia suggests potentially up to 5 years could be needed for a suitable period. Small Business Ombudsman Bruce Bilson actually supported the removal of the exemption, but he asked for right-sized and appropriate regulations for small business. And AI Group has called it costly overregulation.
Okay, that's the small business focus here. What about implications? Are there any implications for bigger businesses and bigger organisations?
Yeah, there are. So one of the changes is to adopt a fair and reasonable test. And that means that all information collected, regardless of the size of the business, has to fall under that description. That's even if a user has ticked a consent box under a long statement about the information being collected. And the definition of personal information is being expanded as well. So cookies and IP addresses, when someone might be reasonably identified by them, even if they're not named, could be considered at this more sensitive personal level of data. Now, the government didn't agree with 10 proposals, but did note them, including suggestions that people should be able to opt out of personalised ads and stop political lobbyists from targeting voters based on their sensitive information. Now, another significant change here is that this might give Australians the right to be forgotten, and that would force major tech companies to wipe the records of individuals if requested.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And these are potentially major changes. So a very big, very important story. Now, how did local markets perform yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed down 0.1% to 7,025 points. That was after recovering from some morning losses. In terms of sectors, the best performers were energy and resources. Woodside Energy was up 2.9% and Santos was up 3.8%. Whitehaven Coal was the top performer, up 6.1%. Gold and consumer discretionary suffered the biggest falls. Lithium Power International was up 34.6%. That was following a Chilean government-owned corporation announcing a possible takeover. And Brickworks shares fell 6.4%, following a drop of about 54% in its full-year net profit.
And what's happening in international markets?
So US stocks and bonds are staring down their worst month of 2023 so far. That's due to concerns about higher for longer interest rates. The S&P 500 is potentially also facing the first quarterly loss in 12 months as well. Also in the US, bit of a positive update. Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan is predicting a soft landing next year, meaning he thinks they'll avoid a recession. He says there's been a shift over the last 6 months and consumer spending is stronger than expected. Plus, average customers have higher account balances to the tune of 3 times higher than their pre-pandemic levels. And in China, the industrial sector decline is slowing, which is giving the market some confidence that policy support is helping. It fell 11.7% year on year. That was over the first 8 months of this year, which is better than a 15.5% contraction on the first 7 months of the year.
Okay, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Jen, the jobs market slid a little in August with new vacancy data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics showing a 9% fall since May. Now, you are the economics correspondent for Capital Brief. So when you see data like this, when you get this big packet of information come through from the ABS, do you just kind of rub your hands together in glee?
Not on days like this one, because there were about 5 different pieces of data that all came out at once.
Okay.
So it's more like, trying to figure it all out gets a little overwhelming. But this one was pretty interesting because the jobs market is something that the RBA is looking at, that economists are looking at pretty closely. And this worked out to be about 38,000 fewer jobs being advertised in the space of 3 months. So there were 390,000 vacancies. It's actually an 18% decline since the peak in May 2022. And critically, it's the 5th quarter of easing demand for workers, suggesting that that sharp skills shortage is starting to ease. And it coincides with this slight rise in the unemployment rate that we've spoken about before. So the market does remain a lot tighter than it was pre-pandemic, but it's clearly easing up now. And the biggest drop in job vacancies was in the ACT, down 9%. Don't think any of them were politicians, though. Queensland was the only state where vacancies were up, with ads rising 4%. And the industry with the biggest decline was actually financial and insurance services. The only industry now to have fewer jobs to fill than February 2020. That was pre-COVID. But some areas have a lot more vacant positions. That includes retail.
Now, Jen, this next story is really quite confronting. More than 3,200 Australians died by suicide last year, according to more data from the Bureau of Statistics, with the figure ticking up from the year before. And there are significant concerns that the cost of living crisis is contributing to rising distress.
Yeah, awful data. So Suicide Prevention Australia CEO Neves Murray said that suicide is obviously complex with many factors here that can exacerbate it, but they can include personal debt, unemployment, family breakdown, social isolation, and mental health challenges. She said there's particular cause for concern for Indigenous men and also men in their 40s. And speaking to those cost of living pressures, the group's community tracker data found that for the first time on their records, more than half of Aussie families are facing higher than normal levels of cost of living related distress. And that was over the most recent September quarter and marks the 5th in a row that cost of living and personal debt were the highest causes of distress on their measures. Now, Suicide Prevention Australia wants the government to adopt a National Suicide Prevention Act. And that would mean that each time the government makes a decision, it's required to consider the impact on suicide and plan appropriately for any risks.
And of course, Lifeline's number 13 11 14. Now, Jen, auctions this weekend are going to be halved with just 1,324 properties scheduled to go under the hammer, but it's not a sign that the market is slowing.
No, it's a sign of long weekends, which we're all very thankful for, I think. So Victoria's obviously off today for the grand final. But people in New South Wales, ACT, South Australia and Queensland all get Monday off, and that means this is the quietest day for auctions since mid-June, with sellers generally preferring to put their homes on the market on a weekend when it's less likely that their buyers are going away on holiday. So Melbourne's got just 108 homes scheduled, Sydney has 805. But it might mean, though, that the weekend after this one is the biggest of the year so far. So last weekend was the second busiest. And in the meantime, it's a really happy long weekend for most of the country.
Jen, over the last, say, 7 or so weeks that you have been doing this podcast with me, there's been a silent battle between us over the pronunciation of the word auctions, where I've insisted on, and we've never addressed it, the fact that I say it as auctions and you say it incorrectly as auctions. And alarmingly, I've seen that you're even getting support on social media for you saying it as auctions, people saying that you're in the right and I'm in the wrong.
I feel like here we have to take the wisdom of the crowd. So I think it's auction is correct, right?
No, it is not, but we will move on from this quickly. The popular smiggle, that's one of those cases where I instantly regretted bringing it up because I realised I didn't have the people on my side. Now, The popular Smiggle stationery chain owned by Solomon Lew's Premier Investments is expanding into the Middle East as the rising cost of living hits sales at its major clothing brands in Australia.
So Premier's planning to open 20 standalone Smiggle stores in the Middle East by the end of next year and 60 over the coming decades. It's huge, exciting news for the business. They've already got more than 300 stores in Australasia, Europe and Asia. But there are some signs of concern on the home front. So sales were down 2% for the business overall in August and the first few weeks of September. That compares to the same period of time a year ago. Premier Investments actually owns Just Jeans, JJ's, Peter Alexander, Dotti and Jackie E. And they're progressing on a strategic review right now of the business.
Yeah, and that all lines up with new data showing retail sales limped upwards in August with a 0.2% increase over the month. The result was actually a little lower than most economists were expecting.
Yeah, and annual growth actually slowed to 1.5%, which was pretty significant in real terms, with prices up 5% over the 12 months to June. Now, Westpac notes that when you consider that population growth is up too, the result looks even weaker. Their economists were expecting a jump 5 times as big over the month, with their internal credit card data showing that FIFA Women's World Cup was expected to have delivered a boost, but it was cafes and restaurants, basic food and household goods that dragged down the results overall. Growth over the year is weakest in Queensland and New South Wales, but doing pretty well in Victoria, South Australia and WA.
Vitamin brand Blackmore's new owner, Kirin Holdings Company, is planning to expand the business into health food.
So Blackmore's was originally established in 1932 by naturopath Maurice Blackmore, an English immigrant to Australia, and Japan's Kirin Holdings bought Blackmore's for $1.9 billion earlier this year. It's Australia's biggest vitamin brand, and now Kirin wants Blackmore's to expand to include food and drinks with immunity and health benefits. Now, it's expected to launch in several countries from 2025 onwards. We don't exactly know what the products are, but speculation is that it will include a Yakult competitor, and that follows an investor day in Japan this week where the business shared that a lactic acid bacteria developed over the past decade was really critical to these future plans.
The Australian Taxation Office has paid Nuix a visit in Sydney as part of its investigation into the software company's 2020 IPO.
So the Financial Review is reporting that the ATO officials took the step of sending officials in person to their headquarters, and that's as they're trying to determine whether the business inappropriately claimed for research and development tax benefits ahead of listing. Now, it must be a really tense time for employees at the moment because the Australian Securities and Investments Commission is also making its own inquiries, and that's into CEO Jonathan Rubinstein's purchase of shares before it was disclosed that it was the target of a takeover. He said it was a coincidence and he didn't have any knowledge of the takeover at the time that it happened.
Australia's top 10 universities have slipped down the Times Higher Education World University rankings. Now, there's a number of different rankings and lists, so we tend to speak about it fairly frequently, but this is a pretty significant one.
Yeah, it's a big one, and it found that the University of Melbourne remains Australia's highest ranking university, so they'll be pretty happy with that. But it did fall from 34th place to 37th. Now, another 5 local unis made it into the top 100, but all slid down the rankings a little bit. Monash, the University of Sydney, ANU, the University of Queensland, and UNSW all made it in. But the University of Adelaide has fallen from 88th to 111th. UTS, Macquarie, and the University of WA also slid. And part of this is due to fewer international students. That's obviously a result of the COVID pandemic, and some points are awarded for that category. But also universities in Asia are strengthening, and so they're rising up through the rankings. China's now got 13 universities in the top 200. That's up from 11 last time. And Japan has 5, up from 2.
Former Prime Minister Julia Gillard, who is certainly one of our quieter ex-PMs, there are definitely former Prime Ministers who are very, very outspoken, and you wouldn't say that Julia Gillard is one of those. But she has supported the Yes campaign for the Indigenous voice to Parliament, and she's done so in the UK in a bid to get the backing of expats.
Yes, she was in Australia House in London yesterday morning backing the campaign, and she was reflecting on the issues of racism and exclusion and how they impact First Nations people. She said that progress had been slower than she had aimed for in government, and one of the reasons that targets have continually failed to be met, in her view, is because the voice of those who can make the biggest difference hasn't been heard. And Australia House is actually the biggest overseas polling booth, and there are about 160,000 eligible voters in the UK who can go there and place their vote.
Turning to international news now, artificial intelligence-powered chatbots are coming to Meta's Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram. This was a pretty big announcement.
It's a huge announcement. It was announced at its Connect conference, and it's going to be an AI assistant that will initially help users answer questions. They're partnering up with Microsoft search engine Bing to be able to find the right answer, and that's alongside some AI image generation as well. But there is kind of a fun angle here. So there are going to be 28 chatbots to start with in the persona of celebrities that are going to feature all across its platforms. And celebrities have kind of been agreeing to hand over their voices for it and their likeness. And that includes Snoop Dogg. And it's all in beta mode from next Wednesday, but they have got future rollout plans for some specific chatbots focused on topics like gaming and fashion and psychology as well.
Gosh, this space is moving quickly. And I know that makes me sound really old to say that, but technology these days.
I agree.
Wow. Now, Chinese property developer, the beleaguered China Evergrande Group's billionaire chairman is under police control.
So that was according to Bloomberg, who spoke to some unnamed sources, and they say he was taken away by Chinese police earlier this month and is being monitored at a designated location. But it isn't publicly known exactly why he's under surveillance, and that doesn't mean that he's been charged with a crime or has actually done anything wrong. Now, the Chinese property market has been floundering this year. We've been talking all about it, and China Evergrande Group, which is the world's most indebted developer. It's also one of the largest, and Evergrande's now stopped trading in Hong Kong because of this situation.
Now, how about this one, Jen? Pandas are maybe the latest victims of frosty China-US relations. The only 3 pandas in Washington, D.C.'s National Zoo are being returned to their owner, China, by December.
So it's actually the end of a 3-year deal between the countries. And there are 3 other US zoos in Atlanta, San Diego, and Memphis that have either returned their pandas or are due to before the year ends. Zoos across the world actually signed deals with China to lease out their pandas. It's unclear how much, though, of this recent decision for the National Zoo is to do with politics. China and the US are saying that it's not, but it's the end of an era, really, because the panda deals often mark symbolic moments of China's relationship with other countries.
The final story, Jen, and Sean is coming back soon. He's back on Monday. And I just have a feeling that this is a story that he would love, because we all know that Costco is renowned for selling bulk snacks and kind of cheaper petrol and all of this. But in the US, they are now selling gold bars. And the best part of it is they're selling out.
Yeah, Costco's been selling 1 ounce gold bars. They're a member-only item through their online stores, but it seems they're selling for around $1,900. And yes, they're selling out. So Chief Financial Officer Richard Galanti said that they don't last long when they're restocked. And that's despite putting limits on them to a member. Now you have to wonder who exactly is buying them. Maybe it's those cashed up preppers. And CNBC, which was reporting on the gold bars, said that Costco has recently been selling 150-serve emergency food kits in the States. So maybe it is the preppers.
Can you imagine all the people that are just burying their gold? And in like 100 years, there'll be this gold rush of everyone searching for the Costco gold that was buried in 2023 when everyone went a little bit nuts.
I feel like it should have a Costco logo on it, which sadly it doesn't. I was a little disappointed when I clicked through to see what the gold looked like.
That would actually be quite amusing. What does it have on it?
It's some kind of female face. I'm sure this is a famous thing for gold buyers. I'm clearly not into the gold bullion purchasing. Maybe Sean is.
You're not big on the gold scene. All right. Now, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. You're speaking with Persia Navidi, a partner at Hickson's Lawyers.
So Persia explains exactly what businesses need to be doing right now to stay up to date with some really significant changes that are coming for how they report and measure their climate and environmental risks.
Yeah, it's a good interview. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks so much, Michael.
It is Friday, the 29th of September, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and Facebook, and join us tomorrow morning as well for the weekend edition. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.